The Economist published an article titled "Why Canada Should Join the EU" at the start of the year. At the time, the piece was widely ridiculed and touted as proof of the Economist's declining quality and credibility. However, a couple of months later, the article no longer looks quite so ridiculous. In fact, it appears somewhat prescient, as Trump's threats of tariffs and annexation against America's northern neighbor have escalated. Canadians have apparently started looking to the EU as a backup ally, and a poll conducted by Abacus Data in late February found that an astonishing 44% plurality of Canadians thought Canada should join the EU, compared to just 34% who thought Canada shouldn't. To be fair, Canada and the EU are already quite closely aligned. Canada has a free trade agreement with the EU, is an observer state in the Council of Europe, and is a founding member of NATO, which has long been the foundation of European security. On top of this, Canada's new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, who now looks likely to win the next election, went to France for his first foreign trip. There, he described Canada as the most European of non-European countries and argued that Canada and Europe are stronger together. This raises the question of whether Canada could actually become the 28th member state of the European Union. The short answer is no. Canada won't be joining the EU anytime soon. You might think that this is simply due to geography. After all, Article 49 of the EU's founding treaty states that only European states can apply for membership, and Canada isn't obviously European. However, this may not be an absolute barrier. For starters, Article 49 doesn't define what it means by European, and this is a contested concept. The EU's predecessor, the European Community, attempted to answer this question more precisely in a 1992 document titled Europe and the Challenge of Enlargement. But they essentially concluded that a strict definition was impossible. They admitted that the term European combines geographical, historical, and cultural elements, and that it was neither possible nor appropriate to establish fixed frontiers for the European Union, which would be shaped over time. Culturally, Canada has strong European influences. It is a European-style social democracy with a well-developed welfare state and deep historical links to both France and the UK. Moreover, the geographical definition of Europe is flexible. Cyprus, for example, is geographically closer to West Asia than continental Europe, and Malta is closer to North Africa. Turkey, generally considered a mostly West Asian country, is nonetheless an official EU candidate country. Additionally, Algeria, despite being in Africa, was included in the European Economic Community until its independence from France in 1962. Canada also shares a close maritime border with the EU via Saint-Pierre and Miquelon, a French territory off the coast of Newfoundland, and a land border with the territory of an EU member state via Greenland. However, it should be noted that Greenland is no longer part of the EU. Canada and Denmark actually used to have a light-hearted border dispute over a tiny island called Hans Island, which sits between the Canadian territory of Nunavut and northern Greenland. In 1984, Canadian soldiers briefly visited the island, leaving a Canadian flag and a bottle of Canadian whiskey. Later that year, Danish officials responded by replacing the Canadian flag with a Danish flag and leaving a bottle of Danish schnapps. This humorous back and forth, known as the Whiskey War, continued for 40 years, with each side periodically swapping out their national flags and alcohol. The dispute was resolved in 2022, following Putin's invasion of Ukraine, when the two countries divided the island in half as a symbolic demonstration that border disputes can be resolved peacefully. Nonetheless, even if Article 49 does not outright prohibit Canada from joining the EU, it is still unlikely to happen. The main reason is that accession requires unanimous approval from all existing member states, which is difficult to achieve. Many EU countries are currently suffering from what is known as enlargement fatigue. The EU has spent considerable political energy bringing in new member states, and now there is a growing sense that the bloc needs to focus on other priorities, such as guaranteeing Ukraine's security without American support. Additionally, some argue that the EU needs internal reform before further expansion. The EU already struggles to achieve consensus among its existing members, with Hungary frequently using its veto power. Many countries believe the EU should either streamline its operations or reform its voting rules to become more geopolitically agile. However, there is one significant caveat. Canada could potentially join an outer tier of a multi-speed EU. The idea of a multi-speed EU with different tiers of membership has been discussed for some time. French President Emmanuel Macron advocated for a four-tier Europe in late 2023 as a way to address the EU's institutional challenges. Under such a model, obstructionist members like Hungary could be placed in an outer tier, giving them less influence over central issues while allowing a more integrated European core to function effectively. Macron's proposal ultimately lost momentum because substantial EU reforms require treaty changes, which again demand unanimous approval from all member states. Many nations are hesitant to support reforms that might reduce their influence in a tiered Europe. However, there are indications that a multi-speed Europe could still emerge, particularly due to the EU's increasing reliance on joint borrowing. The EU first issued joint debt during the COVID-19 crisis and now owes around 300 billion euros. The EU has since resumed borrowing to support Europe's rearmament efforts. This borrowing is necessary because many European countries lack the fiscal capacity to dramatically increase defense spending without making politically difficult cuts elsewhere. The EU, however, can borrow at relatively low interest rates. Eventually, this debt will need to be repaid, possibly through direct EU-level taxes. Since it is unlikely that member states would agree to a significant increase in national contributions, granting the EU taxation powers may be the only way to maintain its high credit rating. This could lead to a division between a core group of countries willing to form a European fiscal union and an outer group that prefers to stay out of it. Canada might qualify for this outer tier, which could be a favorable arrangement. Canada is a large, sparsely populated, resource-rich country, whereas Europe is densely populated and resource-poor. Such a partnership could prove mutually beneficial. If you made it this far into the video, we'd like to thank you for your support. Here at Facts, first, we're committed to bringing you in-depth coverage of geopolitics and economics, keeping you informed with the news that matters most. No bias, no fluff, just the facts. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Stay informed, stay ahead. See you all in the next one.